let's go over developing fitness programs, what you're going to need for your videos. Now, in those videos that I have, the skill videos, I want them to be as short as possible. I know it says less than 2 minutes, but if you have to go a little bit over that, that's okay. But ideally, shoot for about 2 minutes. So when you're making your video, what I want you to do is go back and look back through your health history questionnaire. Is there any information in there that you can use to develop your fitness program? Were there any concerns? Don't give personal information in those videos, but you can say, well, I had a couple of red flags. Those are going to help me develop my SMART goals. And then go back through all the health-related components. So that would be the pre-testing. Look that over and see if there's any information in there. Obviously, you may be able to find something that relates back to the health history questionnaire. Let me just go back up. Let's say you have high blood pressure and you want to change that somewhat. You can go into your pre-test and say that you're going to do more cardiorespiratory endurance. That doesn't necessarily have to be just running. That could be walking. So if you already have really high blood pressure, you don't want to start off running. You start off walking, and that'll not only help you lose weight, but it can also drop that blood pressure by improving your body composition and just making you more active. So you could look at body composition, you could look at weight, and you can say, hey, I'm going to try to change these things using some sort of cardiorespiratory endurance training. So maybe it's walking. So that's just to give you an idea. Maybe you want to go the muscle strength route. So you can say, oh, well, I'm going to try to put on some more lean mass. So I'm going to do muscle strength training or maybe muscle endurance training, depending on the type of muscle you want to put on. And see if that changes anything. Or maybe you're going to do a combination of muscle endurance and cardiorespiratory endurance. Doesn't matter. But what I want you to get from this is that you looked at your health history questionnaire. Maybe there's nothing on there, but let's say if there is, try to relate it back to your pre-testing. Then you want to develop SMART goals. So make sure these are specific. Don't have too many goals. So narrow it down, 2 or 3, maybe it's just 1, and that's fine. Make sure they're measurable, which they are, because we've done, at this point, we will have done the pre-testing. Make sure they're attainable. So like I mentioned in previous slides, don't say you want to lose 20% body fat. That's just not realistic in the time that we have, and it's not healthy to try to do it in that time. Make sure they're relevant so that they go back to your pre-testing, that you can link them to your data, and make sure that they're time bound, which they will be because you're going to have to finish this up. Motivation, start off slowly. If you're new to this, don't get crazy with this and set unrealistic goals that are going to have a dramatic impact on your motivation. That's the reason it's important to develop relevant, obtainable goals and make sure that you avoid barriers to success. And I see this all the time. I see this with students that are trying to improve their fitness, and I see it in students trying to achieve their academic goals. So it will pertain to both. So self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a prediction that will directly impact or indirectly impact your actions. So, I hear students say, well, I can't do this, I can't do that, and so they don't even bother trying. So avoid that. Locus of control. It's important to understand this concept when you're developing goals and developing a program. So you want to get into the mindset that you are in control, that it's an internal locus of control, that you control your own destiny. So avoid external locus of control, where you feel that others have power over you and their actions have control over what you can accomplish. Reinforcement is extremely important. It's better to use reinforcement than punishment when you're trying to maintain motivation. And I had talked about this in previous slides. This is a good way to look at it. This narrows it down. So you're adding something pleasant to increase behavior. If you're increasing behavior, that's reinforcement. If you're decreasing behavior, it's punishment. It's a good way to tell the two apart. So you want something that's going to increase activity or whatever it is to help you obtain your goal. So adding something pleasant to increase your behavior, or removing something you don't like to increase that behavior, that would be negative reinforcement. So positive punishment is adding something that somebody doesn't like to decrease their behavior, or you're removing something pleasant that they do like to decrease behavior. But again, try to determine, are you trying to increase behavior? If you are, then that's reinforcement. And that's what I would really like you to focus on. Reinforcement, research has shown, is more beneficial for the long haul. Punishment will work for a short period of time, but it's not as motivating as reinforcement. FIT principle: frequency, intensity, time, and type. And a lot of this stuff you're going to hear repeated in other lectures. How often are you going to work out? You need to understand that when you're developing your program. So how often? 3 to 5 days a week? Well, look, we're going to get to the American College of Sports Medicine recommendations, and that's really going to tell you what you should set it around based on your goals. Intensity: how hard are you going to go? If you're a beginner, don't set it too hard. It'll destroy your motivation. It'll be hard for you to be consistent. And you may have some health problems that intensity, if you have it too high, can cause problems for you. So time: how long are you going to go for? 20 to 30 minutes. And if this was more anaerobic, where it's stop and go, like weight training, then how long are you going to go between the sets is important. So am I going to wait a minute between reps or sets? Or am I going to, and you also need to consider how long am I going to work out for? So is it going to be 20 or 30 minutes? It's all important, even on anaerobic activity. These all depend on your goals and sport specificity. So again, creating a program, set your SMART goals, use your pre-test results, also your health history questionnaires. This is just kind of summing up what I was talking about before we get into the recommendations from American College of Sports Medicine. Look at normative data. Are you below, or are you average, or are you above average? That'll help you kind of see if you need to change some areas. Decide if goals are sport-specific training or general fitness. So are you training for a specific sport? If you are, you need to design your training around that. If you're just going for general fitness, you want to set your programming around the activities that are available to you. So I would encourage you to do sport-specific training. It gives you more meaning. Even if you're a beginner, find a sport that you love and design all your training around it, your whole program around it. Because you'll be surprised at how long you can work out for if it's something you really like. Like I get really bored just getting in there and running on a treadmill, but if I have a sport that I can design my training around, I do a lot better. So the purpose of the American College of Sports Medicine recommendation, it should be used in conjunction with FIT principle. So frequency, intensity, time, and type, which it is. I mean, that's what it talks about. And it should kind of be a guideline for program development. And it really helps beginners. So beginners that don't know where to start, it's a really good guideline because there's a lot of research that goes into it. So for cardiorespiratory endurance, adults should at least get 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per week. So we're looking at 30 to 60 minutes for the session, at least 5 days per week if it's moderate intensity. If it's vigorous intensity, you can go a little less, 20 to 60 minutes. And we'll help you I'll talk about how to set your training zones. So it can be continuous, meaning that we do the whole 20-minute session in one workout. Or it can be cumulative, meaning that I can break it up into 10-minute sections or 5-minute sections. It just depends. For aerobic activity, it's going to have to be greater than 5 minutes to be considered aerobic. So gradual progression. So even if you can't do the minimums, you can still benefit from some activity. Something is better than nothing. So resistance exercise, 2 to 3 days per week, because you need to make sure you get enough rest in between. if you're going to hit those major muscle groups, they need a little bit more rest. Ideally for some of the larger muscle groups that require more healing, about 48 hours between. So if I hit my legs one day, I'll do upper body the next, so that I don't go right back to the legs the very next day, because they have huge muscle groups in them. Same thing for upper body. If I go in and start doing bench press and rows, I'm going to avoid upper body the next day to make sure I get plenty of recovery. And there's a bunch of programs you can go under. So if you're looking for strength training, 8 to 12 repetitions. So let's say I'm going to do about 3 sets of whatever weight it is that I can do 8 times. That would be a strength training program. So for older people, they recommend more of a muscle endurance program. So that's 10 to 15 reps or more muscle hypertrophy, so that you're not straining too hard, you're not doing too heavy of a weight. And if you're looking for just straight up muscle endurance, 15 to 20 reps. That's good if you're doing a lot of cardio. So the muscle endurance training and cardiorespiratory training go hand in hand. If you're trying to focus on muscle strength and you're doing a lot of cardio, you really need to decide if you're going to focus on one or the other, because they don't go hand in hand. I mean intense cardio, because intense cardio is going to reduce the strength gains you're going to get. Or if you're doing an all-strength training program, you're doing just a little bit of cardio each week. What I'm getting at is one is going to affect the other. And what I was talking about earlier, you need recovery at least 48 hours on your resistance training to give those large muscle groups time to heal. For flexibility, 2 to 3 days per week. To improve range of motion, this can be through static stretching, dynamic stretching. You want to hold these for about 10 to 30 seconds if it's static, or PNF stretching. And then you repeat that stretch 2 to 4 times. This is what American College of Sports Medicine recommends. So what is static stretching? That's where if I went into a stretch and I held it at the end of the range of motion for about 10 to 30 seconds, that would be static stretching. So holding it in a static position is what I'm getting at. Dynamic, going through a range of motion. So if you see somebody kicking a heavy bag, that's considered dynamic stretching. So if you see a dancer go through their moves, dynamic stretching. Ballistic is bouncing in a stretch. You got to be real careful with that. For a long time, they wanted people to avoid ballistic stretching, but now it's kind of back because we need some of those plyometric movements. But it can activate a type of proprioceptor called muscle spindles. And if those activate right when you're at the bottom of your range of motion, it can tear a muscle, because those muscle spindles tell the muscle to contract. And then we have PNF stretching. You also see this in gymnastics. You'll see ballistic stretching, PNF stretching used in gymnastics. So if you see somebody lay back, somebody grabs their leg and starts to push it towards their head, and they get to kind of a sticking position where they're feeling a lot of resistance, they hold it there. And then the person being stretched pushes back against that for about 10 seconds. And then they release the contraction of the muscle, and then the person pushing the leg can go a little further. So it's most effective, flexibility exercises are most effective when the muscle is warm. So you don't want to use your stretching as a warm-up. You want to do movements. I mean, you could use dynamic stretching, but I'm talking about static stretching. So you want to warm the muscle up, do your activity, and then use your static stretching at the end of your workout. That's when you're going to get the most from it. You know, warm those muscles up. American College of Sports Medicine for neuromuscular exercise, their recommendation is 2 to 3 days per week. So what is that? That's more balance, agility, coordination, so more skill-based. So when I was talking about sport-specific training, consider that neuromotor, because we're getting the muscle memory of the activity along with it. So 20 to 30 minutes per week is appropriate. And I'm just trying to give you some ideas that will align with your goals. So what is aerobic training and anaerobic training? I was talking about it. Well, just think of it as continuous and repetitive. So you may hear the term in the presence of oxygen. we're using a different energy system. I'm not going to get too in depth here because I don't want this video to be too long, but we'll talk about this when we get into some of the health-related components of fitness and we talk about cardiorespiratory training, or when we talk about strength training and muscle endurance training, we'll talk about anaerobic. So it's stop and go for anaerobic, and it's continuous and repetitive. Pretty much over about 5 minutes, and it's continuous and repetitive, it becomes aerobic. All right, periodization. Want to break up our training. So elite level athletes use this. So they might focus on strength training in the off season, 1 to 2 days of cardio, but most of the week is taken up with strength training. That would be an example of periodization. They do that for, let's say, 6 to 10 weeks, or maybe it's 12 weeks, whatever the training regimen is. And then they switch to another where the next period of exercise is focused on cardio. This really depends on the sport, but I'm just giving you an idea of how they do periods of exercise where they have intense focus on these areas. So they do cardio most of the week, and they do just a little bit of strength training. Or maybe they're focused on muscle endurance, so they do muscle endurance for most of those weeks, and just in each week, just a little bit of strength training, just a little bit of cardio. And these tend to be around sport-specific drills. So if you think of football, like during their off season, they were kind of rehabbing, doing some strength training, building up. And then as they get closer and closer to the season, they start doing more sport-specific drills where they go to camps and they run through the drills. They're still doing their strength training and stuff. They're still doing, but now there's more of a focus on sport-specific drills. Overload. We need to progressively overload the body so we don't plateau. So we increase intensity over time. So if this is cardiorespiratory training, we're increasing heart rate by maybe doing interval training where we get a really high heart rate and we drop down and cool off. So we start to lengthen the time that we're at those higher heart rates and over time shorten the rest interval. So that would be an example of overload. For resistance training, you're just putting on more weight or doing more reps if it's muscle endurance training. So for like strength training, we might start adding more weight. After 2 or 3 weeks of doing that weight, we throw on another 2.5 pounds and slowly, progressively overload the body. If it's muscle endurance, we just start adding in more reps or more sets of reps until we get to a certain point. All right, cardiorespiratory training zones. So take 220 minus your age. So I used a 20-year-old person here just to give you an idea. This is where most people go wrong in their cardio, is they're not measuring heart rate and they're not training in their zones. So they're either going too hard or not hard enough. And so if you go too hard, you burn out. If you don't go hard enough, you're not getting all the benefit. So this is just a rough estimate, right? There's the key word, estimate. Take 220 minus your age. So for a 20-year-old person, your estimated max heart rate is 200. Now we want to train at a percentage or in between percentages so that we're not training too hard. For a beginner, we want to set them at 80%. If you've been doing cardio, you might set that at 90% if you've been doing cardio for a long time. You got to kind of play around with this. It's not set in stone. Uh-oh, what did I do there? Okay. So 200 times 0.80 will give us a heart rate of 160. So that's 80% of our estimated max. So I don't want to go above that if I'm a beginner. And I take 200 times 0.70, so it's 70%, and then I'm at 140. So a lot of heart rate monitors, you can set these so they'll beep if you get above. You'll know that you're going above because you'll be huffing and puffing, but they'll beep. And then when you start hearing it beep, you come back down if you're huffing and puffing. If you're having a real easy time, it starts to beep, then you're too low. So we're training in between 160 and 140 for most of your beginners when we're trying to maximize our benefit from cardio. But again, if you've been doing cardio most of your life, these may be way too low for you. You have to kind of play around with them. And if you've been doing cardio most of your life, your estimated max will be off. So I know for me, like I'm mid-40s, these aren't that intense for me to maintain a heart rate at 160. It's not really tough. Well, it's tough, but it's not too tough for me. Whereas if I went, it's mainly because I've been doing cardio most of my life, and so it's easier for me. I haven't had the same decline as the average person that hasn't been training, and we'll talk about that in future slides. Resistance training. So you can take that same percentage and find out what you need to be working out with. So let's say you do a max 1 rep on bench press, 200. This is just more of a common sense test to find out where you're training at. So you lift 200 one time. So you're like, well, what should I train at? That's all I can lift. Take that number, 200 times 0.80, and you should be working out doing sets of 8 to 10 reps with 160. It's just a common sense training method. Or maybe you want to do 50% because you're a beginner. And you're like, well, and now you want to do more muscle endurance training. So you would take that 200 times 0.50. I know this is common sense, but you'd be training with 100 pounds, repping it out. And you can probably rep it out quite a bit. If you start to get over reps, if your reps get over 20, you need to dial it back. You need to increase the weight. Otherwise, you could just be doing push-ups. So if you're training with weights and you start doing more repetitions, you need to go up in weight at that point. So try to stay between 15 and 20. So once you can start doing 3 sets of 20 of something, you need to up the weight and go back to a weight that maybe is tough for you to do 15 times. And then stick with that weight until you can rep it out. So I know this is a long video. I'm trying to keep them as short as possible. Next chapter or next module, we'll talk about developing your nutrition programs. And it's just real basic information.